Imagine this. You pull into the parking lot of your small-town church on a Sunday morning, the kind of place where the scent of fresh coffee drifts from the fellowship hall, where hymns float out of stained glass windows, and where families gather because faith and community mean everything. But instead of peace, you're met with hostility. A clipboard-wielding HOA board member storms up, waving papers in your face, declaring that your church doesn't have the right to park here anymore, that the very ground where your congregation finds fellowship is suddenly against the rules. My heart pounded that day, not just from shock but from the audacity. They weren't just trying to take away parking. They were trying to choke the life out of a community that leaned on faith when everything else felt uncertain. And if you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever watched someone abuse their tiny slice of power to crush something meaningful, then you already know the fire that lit inside me. They thought we'd roll over. They thought faith meant weakness. What they didn't know was that faith can move mountains, and sometimes it can also move legal battles, petitions, and entire neighborhoods against the people who mistake control for authority. That day marked the beginning of a war I never asked for, but one that I was determined to finish. I'm going to take you through the whole story, from the first condescending smirk of the HOA president to the moment their empire of petty rules collapsed under the weight of their own arrogance. It wasn't just revenge, it was justice, and it was one of the sweetest lessons in karma I've ever seen play out. I'll never forget the first time I crossed paths with Margaret, the president of our neighborhood HOA. She had the kind of demeanor that made you feel judged before you even opened your mouth. You know the type: perfectly ironed clothes, a nose that always seemed tilted upward, and that tone of voice that carried more authority than the sheriff himself, at least in her mind. Margaret loved rules. She lived for them, and when she couldn't find a rule to enforce, she'd invent one. At first, I brushed it off. After all, I had bigger things to worry about: my family, my job, and above all, the little church down the street that had become the heart of our community. But Margaret didn't see it that way. To her, the church was nothing more than a nuisance, an eyesore she had to control. The first confrontation happened after service one Sunday. Our congregation wasn't huge, maybe 40 or 50 regulars, but we'd outgrown the small gravel lot beside the church years ago. Overflow cars would park along the curb or in the open community lot nearby. Nobody ever complained until Margaret decided it was her new mission. She came striding across the lot in her heels, practically marching, her clipboard in hand. "You can't park here," she snapped at me as though I were some reckless teenager caught doing donuts. I blinked, trying to process. "Excuse me?" I asked, genuinely confused. "This is community property. It's always been open." She gave me that tight smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. "Not anymore. The HOA board has voted to restrict usage. No church parking allowed. It violates zoning and HOA agreements." Now, let me pause here and explain something. Our little town was the kind where people waved to each other on the street, where kids sold lemonade on the corner, and where the church doubled as a food pantry every Thanksgiving. We weren't some big corporation trying to bulldoze our way into a gated community. We were neighbors, friends, family. The idea that parking a few cars could be so offensive? It was absurd, but Margaret wasn't about community. She was about control. I tried reasoning with her. I explained that the church had been there longer than most of the homes in the subdivision, that our members were respectful, and that parking overflow had never been a problem before. She didn't care. She just kept pointing at her clipboard, rattling off made-up violations and threatening to tow cars at the owner's expense. That was the first Sunday we had elders, young mothers with babies, and even elderly folks with walkers forced to park blocks away just because Margaret wanted to flex her power. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. Anger isn't something that sits quietly inside you. It burns. It ate at me all week, every time I passed the church, every time I saw kids playing on the grass out front, every time I thought about how far some of our oldest members would have to walk just to make it to service. It wasn't just about parking anymore, it was about respect. It was about principle. Margaret wanted to send a message that she owned this neighborhood, but she forgot one thing. She didn't own our faith, and she didn't own me. The weeks that followed were a nightmare. True to her word, Margaret began issuing citations to anyone who parked in the community lot on Sundays. She hired a towing company and had several cars hauled away. Imagine the humiliation of walking out of church, Bible in hand, only to find your car gone and a note demanding hundreds of dollars. I'll never forget the tears in Mrs. Henderson's eyes when it happened to her. She was 78 years old, living on a fixed income, and the car she'd saved for years to buy was dragged off like she was some criminal. That was the moment something inside me snapped. Enough was enough. Margaret wasn't just enforcing rules, she was targeting us. She was targeting the church, and if she wanted a war, then I was ready to give her one. I spent nights digging through documents, pulling up HOA bylaws, zoning laws, city ordinances, anything I could find that proved she was overstepping her bounds. And, oh boy, did I find gold. Turns out the lot she was so eager to claim authority over, it wasn't even under HOA jurisdiction. It was considered public easement property, which meant she had no legal right to ban anyone from parking there. The towing she ordered? Illegal. Every ticket, every citation, every fine she slapped on us was bogus. My pulse raced when I realized it. Margaret thought she was untouchable, but in reality, she'd been digging her own grave. But here's the thing about revenge. You can't just rush in guns blazing. You've got to be patient. You've got to let the trap set itself. I quietly gathered evidence. Photos of the lot, copies of the ordinances, testimonies from members who had their cars towed. I documented every single interaction with Margaret, every smug comment, every fake violation she tried to enforce. I built a case so solid it could knock down a brick wall. And then I waited. The breaking point came on Easter Sunday. Our biggest service of the year, the one where even people who hadn't set foot in church for months came back. Families dressed in their best, kids with baskets ready for the egg hunt, the choir rehearsing with joy in their voices. It should have been a beautiful day, but Margaret wasn't about to let that happen. She showed up with 2 tow trucks and had nearly a dozen cars hauled off while we were still in service. When people walked out and saw what had happened, chaos erupted. Tears, anger, shouting. It was the most disrespectful, cruel thing she could have done. And for Margaret, it was also the biggest mistake of her life. The next morning, I filed a formal complaint with the city. Armed with my mountain of evidence, I presented everything. The illegal towing, the harassment, the targeting of a religious institution. The city didn't just take notice, they launched a full investigation. The towing company was slapped with fines and ordered to return money to every single person they'd wronged. Margaret, on the other hand, faced the wrath of the very community she thought she controlled. Word spread like wildfire. Neighbors who had once been silent started speaking up about her bullying tactics. Petitions circulated demanding her removal from the HOA board. At the next meeting, dozens of people showed up, furious, demanding answers. I watched as Margaret's smug expression cracked as her confidence faltered, as she realized the tide had turned against her. But I wasn't done. Remember how she'd targeted us on Easter Sunday? Well, I made sure that story reached the local newspaper, and when they ran the headline about an HOA president towing cars from a church on the holiest day of the year, the backlash was brutal. Margaret became the face of petty cruelty. People she'd once counted as allies turned their backs on her. Attendance at HOA meetings dropped, dues payments slowed, and eventually, under immense pressure, Margaret was forced to resign. The day she stepped down, I can't even describe the feeling. Relief, triumph, vindication, it all came rushing in. We weren't just free from her tyranny. We'd proven that when you stand up against injustice, even the most arrogant bully can fall. Our church parking lot, completely restored. The city even designated part of it as official overflow parking for community events, ensuring no one could ever pull the same stunt again. Sometimes revenge isn't about anger, it's about justice. It's about protecting the people and values that matter most. And in this case, it was about proving that faith doesn't mean weakness, that community doesn't bow to control, and that sometimes the best revenge is letting someone's own arrogance destroy them. So, the next time someone underestimates you, remember this story. Remember Margaret. Remember that no matter how small or powerless you feel, there's always a way to fight back, to stand tall, and to remind the world that respect isn't much demanded with a clipboard and fake rules. It's earned through kindness, fairness, and the courage to do what's right.